So, last week we talked about the promised land as it applies to this study. So just as a reminder, the promised land is a reference to the abundant life and rest that God has called us to live in Him. And I forgot the word strong and victoriously on the end of that, but there you go. At least it's on your paper.
I know, I was still getting ready.
We're paying attention.
I thought you were talking about last week too. Here I'm sitting here going, okay.
Surprise!
Best.
If you're like me, you've slept since then, and maybe you needed that little
I think you should start everyone with that.
Yes.
particular reminder.
a little reminder, because that's where we want to. That's where we want to head, right?
Every morning you need to text that to us, every morning.
Really? Oh boy. Well, Claudia doesn't answer her phone, so I'm not sure how.
know.
Maybe I'll leave a note on her doorstep.
She always says she's not home and I say, I don't believe it. Hang up.
So
You don't have the strong and victorious lead here.
I know. Yeah, I forgot to go back to my PowerPoint. And victoriously, that's right. Yep, I forgot to go back to my PowerPoint. I always type everything up and then I go back later and I start reading it again and fixing typos, and I try to remember to do all three things, and sometimes I don't. So anyway, so today we're going to take an initial look at Joshua the person before we really dive into the promised land, because I think it's important to know a little background about him. So we're going to do like a little history lesson, so to speak, on him, little factoid research on him. So, because he was the one that took the Israelites into the promised land, so I think it's good to know something about him in case you aren't familiar with him. So, Joshua is the 12th generation born to Joseph from his son Ephraim in Egypt. And you'll find the generations listed, and hopefully I counted correctly, in 1 Chronicles 7, 20 through 28. So he is basically the tribal leader of the tribe of Ephraim at this point. When Joshua. Yeah. He's Ephraim's head of family. So he's the one that would be the leader, because they usually pick, the top family member to be the leader. So we read about him in Numbers 13:8 that he was from the tribe of Ephraim. That's the other place. And his name was Hoshea, not that I'm saying that correctly, the son of Nun. So Joshua's original name was Ashua or Hosea, meaning he saves. So we read a little more about his name in Numbers 13:16. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and Moses called Hosea, the son of Nun, Joshua. So Moses decides to rename him after watching Joshua in action for about 1.5 to 2 years at this point, and he's renamed him. And in his naming him, he named him Joshua, meaning Jehovah is salvation. So he changed the meaning of his name a little bit. He's been working with him for 1.5 years, and he's gotten to know him. So in other words, Joshua, the man, isn't going to do the saving. God is. That's the name change. So Moses has given us a little prophecy hidden in Joshua's name. And it's also prophecy, even as we'll see, regarding the entrance into the promised land. The name Joshua is Hebrew, and we see it used in the New Testament in Greek as Jesus. So that's one little foreshadowing about Jesus right there inside Joshua. As we go through this study, we're going to see more foreshadowings of Jesus. He's not a complete foreshadow like Joseph was. but he's got some traits about him that you can see Jesus in Joshua's life. So we'll see a little bit more about that. But just his name, Moses renamed him, and he ended up with the same name as Jesus. So Joshua, in Joshua 24:29, we read that he was 110 years old when he died. And tradition places that event 28 years after they entered the land. So for 28 years he was there conquering the land with the Israelites. So he basically led the Israelites at the age of 82 and fought wars and did battle at the age of 82. Talk about God giving you vigor and strength to do his work. So that and then if you subtract 40 years of the wandering around in the wilderness, he was 42 years old when he left Egypt. And he was already basically one of the leaders in the tribe at that point. So one of the first times we meet him is in Exodus 17:8 through 16. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses said to him, and fought with Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua." He wants Joshua to be reminded about this great feat that he was a part of. "That I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven." He wants Joshua to remember that, because as they enter the land of Israel, it's important he keeps passing that information on to the people, because Amalek's descendants are going to still continue to be a threat. And you read clear into the time period of Esther, they're still there causing trouble. So it was important that Joshua remembered this. Moses wanted him to remember. And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." That ties to one of our messages a couple of weeks ago. For he said, "Because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." So at this point, when we first really meet Joshua, this is a couple of months after entering kind of the wilderness area. They've been out of Egypt for like 2 months, maybe at this point, three tops. And he's now basically the general, and he's a great warrior. So Joshua is a great warrior, and he's basically serving as Moses' general. And what for your first battle, what a glorious event to take place. You're watching the miracle through Moses holding up his arms, and the people helping him hold up his arms. And while his arms were up, the people were winning that battle. What a miracle. And Joshua got to take part in that, to be the leader for that battle. So another time we meet him is when he goes with Moses and 70 of the elders and Aaron and Hur up the mountain for Moses' 5th trip up the mountain. So we read about what happens to them up there. They basically sit down partway up the mountain and have a church potluck. Got potluck on the brain. But anyway, they sit down and they eat together up on the hill. So you got like 73 guys up on the mountainside, halfway up somewhere, eating a meal together and fellowshipping with the Lord. The Lord is actually there with them. It's a miraculous scene. Exodus 24, 9 through 18. Then Moses went up also, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu. Oh, I'm sorry, I mixed up some of my people. And 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone. And it was like the very heavens in its clarity. This is just an amazing scene, and just one of my favorite passages because it's so amazing. But on the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. God spared all of them, even though most of the time they're living in fear because they're fearful of seeing God because no man has seen God, right? But here he is fellowshipping, partaking in a meal with them. And they saw God, and out of mercy, he didn't lay a hand on them. He just let them all fellowship together with him. So they saw God, and they ate and drank. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain. So he's like partially up the mountain having this meal. Come up to me on the mountain. So he wants to go up higher. And be there, and I will give you tablets of stone, and the law and the commandments which I've eaten. Wow. Which I have written, that you may teach them. So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the top of the mountain of God. So who went with Moses? Joshua. So Joshua left the gang and went up the hill with him, right? And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man has a difficulty, let him go to them. So what was his instructions? What was Moses' instructions to the rest of the 70? Wait. Remember that. Wait here. Then Moses went up into the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. Now the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days, and on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. So they've gone up a little higher into the cloud. Moses and Joshua were there for another 7 days, just waiting on the Lord. And he calls out to Moses, come here, come up a little higher. So the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. So people all down below can see this glorious sight. And it must have been probably kind of frightening, I would think, not knowing what all is going on. Knowing all your leaders have just headed up the hill, right? So Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Now Joshua is still there with them. We just don't know how close he is in proximity to where Moses and God is, but he went up most of the way with him. So he's up there for 40 days and 40 nights, pretty much kind of by himself, because Moses is busy with God. Maybe he can hear what's going on, I don't know. You can't tell from the passage what he really experienced. So in this section, we see that Joshua, now as Moses' personal assistant, went higher up the mountain with Moses. That's an important thing to take note of. So while they're up there for 40 days and 40 nights, that whole time, God's talking to Moses about the instructions for the tabernacle, rules about the Sabbath, rules about sacrifices and offerings, rules about how to use the incense, how to make the priestly garments. He gave him all those instructions for 40 days and 40 nights. And you have to wonder, how did Moses remember all that stuff? Because he came down off the hill, it all got written down. He's not like etching it in stone up there. You don't think. God must have just implanted it just in his head as he's speaking it, because he came down with such details on how to build the tabernacle and everything. But, so anyway, at the end of this whole event, God writes with his own finger the 10 Commandments on the tablets of stone and hands it to Moses and says, here, go back to the people. So, I hope I didn't lose a spot. Oh, maybe I just didn't give you this one. Like Moses, Joshua was up in the cloud on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. I just forgot to give it to you, sorry. You guys are probably filling it in without me. Okay, so this is where we lead off, is them, I believe, coming off the mountain. Exodus 32:15 through 18. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets, did you guys get it all? I'm sorry. And the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides. On the one side and on the other side they were written. Now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. How cool would that have been to have that? And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a noise in the war of camps. This is how you know Joshua's still with Moses up there, and he's wondering what's going on. They can hear what the noise down below. But he said, it is not the noise of the shout of victory, nor the noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. There's a party happening down the hill.
Who said that?
Moses. He's telling Joshua, ain't no war. That's them having a good old time down there for some reason. So, it's on this occasion we see a big difference between Joshua and even Aaron. Where was Joshua all this time?
With Moses.
Right with Moses, nearby God, doing as he's asked to do. He's concerned about the people down below, but who's missing from action here?
The 73, including Aaron.
Yep, they were, what were their instructions? Wait. They didn't even wait. They just decided to go down off the hill. Then
It's a party.
well, and then he's down there and he starts caving into the people's worries. Well, if they'd stayed up on the hill, this would not have happened. So they end up making the golden calf, having a big party, walking away from their God who just had rescued them from Egypt. I mean, it's only been a few months, and you'd think a lot of those miracles and plagues would be fresh on their hearts and minds because they just saw that. And then you just watched the whole mountaintop. All the people saw the fire up above and the cloud come down, right? They could all see that. Then you have 70 people that just ate with the Lord who come down off the hill. And they heard the Lord instruct them, come up the hill. They know where Moses is at and who he's with. It blows my mind, but I have to remind myself, I do stupid things and walk away from God and make mistakes and sin too. I'm not... We all quickly forget sometimes stuff that God's told us to do, but it just seems so sad, that this had to go on after that experience.
I know we quickly forget, but what blows my mind is that Aaron came down and acquiesced to those people, built the calf himself.
Yes.
And then when Moses asked, he didn't know how it got there. That's what I'm saying. Oh, yes, he did. He just threw it in and it jumped out. That's what I'm saying.
He lied.
He lied about it. Straight to Moses' face.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened. I just gathered that, you know how gold is. It just molds itself.
You'd think after
I
the...
believe how he lied right there.
I mean,
Why did God strike him dead?
Yeah, you have to wonder... I mean, you only read about Miriam getting in trouble at one point. She got punished for talking back, and Aaron didn't. And it's a very interesting thing what God's reasoning was. We won't understand, but here he is walking through Egypt side by side with Moses, even helping partake in performing some of the miracles.
Well, he was the spokesperson.
Right.
Moses didn't even talk.
Right, and you'd think with all that experience over everybody else in camp, Aaron would have had his act together, but he gave in to their complaints. But that's a big difference between Joshua and Aaron. You see Joshua sticking close to Moses, sticking close to God, and not caving into sin. And we see that repeatedly. He is obedient and serves the Lord. So Joshua trustfully and patiently waited for Moses on the mountain while Aaron left the mountain of God and came down and led the people into sin. He's the one, if anybody, is supposed to be leading them out of sin. That's his job. But he led him into sin.
Well, and he still got to have the priestly lineage with his...
Right.
The people that were, just shows God's grace, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing you could say about it. It does show God's grace, his mercy and grace.
Because goodness knows, we all have, I would imagine everybody here has at least 2 Bibles. We have all the history to support our faith, and we still screw it up.
Mm-hmm. So after Moses gets upset with the people and God deals with their sin and that whole situation that took place, Moses sacrifices his own personal home, his tent, his personal tent, sets it up outside the camp and makes it the temporary tabernacle while they spend time building the tabernacle that God's instructed. So he wants the place still to meet with God, to worship and to hear from God. So that's where we come to this scene with Joshua in Exodus 33, 7 through 11. Moses took his tent and pitched it outside the camp, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And it came to pass that everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which was outside the camp. So it was whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle that all the people rose, and each man stood at his tent door and watched Moses until he had gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass when Moses entered the tabernacle that the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose and worshipped, each man at his tent door. So the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend, and he would return to the camp. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, so this is good news for you. When you're 42, you're still young. And he did not depart from the tabernacle. Is that pretty cool? Talk about dedication. Dedication to the Lord, dedication to Moses. Because whether he's serving in the capacity of guarding the tabernacle or staying there to worship and learn, or just to be in God's presence if he should come. I mean, what a testimony to Joshua. Who do you think should have been at the tabernacle? Aaron. Where's Aaron? So that was one of those things I'd never really thought about before. That was Aaron's job. Now, unless he's maybe overseeing the building of the new tabernacle, the real one that's supposed to be done, I don't know. So we don't see Aaron, the new high priest, at the temporary tabernacle, but we see Joshua not even departing from the tabernacle. So Joshua has witnessed the great miracles in Egypt like most of the people had done. He's seen the Red Sea part. He prevailed as a warrior, when God was lifting up Moses, as Moses lifted up his arms. He's actually sat and had fellowship with the Lord on the mountain. He's had a lot of really great experiences, and he's watched God work mightily through Moses all these, it's been, what has it been? At least maybe a year at this point, who knows? But he's never the whole time gotten jealous of Moses, wanted his position, questioned him, or did anything like that. He just faithfully served Moses and did what he needed to do to follow God. He just recognized that Moses was God's man. There was an incident, and I didn't put it in here, where in the camp when they were divided, the Lord was giving Moses some help, and so he was creating some leaders, and he was sending forth his spirit. And there were a couple of guys that stayed back in the camp, and they received the Lord's spirit, and they were prophesying in the camp. And Joshua was so protective of Moses, he runs up and says, "What should we do about these men? They're out prophesying in the camp," because he wanted, things to be done right. And so Moses said, "It's okay. It's okay." He wasn't concerned about anybody. How do I put it? He didn't want others to usurp Moses' authority. He wanted Moses to be recognized and honored. He didn't want people out in the camp taking his job. So he honored Moses a lot, his whole time out there. So Joshua recognized the power of God in Moses' life and chose to be by his side for mentoring, and as a result, be by God's side on the mountain and at the tabernacle. That's the way it is with us when we find someone who's walking with God, and we stay by their side and we let them mentor us or disciple us. It's like being by God's side, because you're getting closer to God through the process. And that's what was happening with Joshua. So next thing that we see Joshua is about a year and a half after out wandering through the wilderness, and we see him as one of the 12 leaders, since he's basically the tribal head of Ephraim's tribe. he's sent to spy out the land. That's one of the most famous stories we know for Joshua, right? So Numbers 14, 6 through 10. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. So God put a stop to it right there. He decided to show up, make it obvious that he was paying attention to what was going on. So Joshua is one of the two men who displayed great faith in God. He knew that, they said the protection's been removed from the people. God delights in us. He's going to take care of it. Those big giants are no threat. And he was one of the two men that stood up to the congregation to the point where they were going to be stoned. Are you that brave? That's a scary position to be in. So the rest doubted and feared, and as you know, the result is they never entered the promised land, which is where we are now. We're about to enter the promised land with that generation that were younger, that hadn't been necessarily in Egypt. It's their kids, all the kids and grandkids that are going to go into the land. And only two adults, Joshua and Caleb, are going to enter the land. So I just thought, looking over Joshua's life to this point, these 2 years with him in the wilderness, these little stories that we have of him, it just made me think of these questions. Do you desire to spend time with God? Are you willing to stay or willing to hike up a mountain? That's a good one. Or stay behind a church if God calls you to be with him like Joshua did? Are you willing to make the time to put him first in your life? Do you recognize someone God has put in your life to mentor you, or that you can mentor or disciple yourself? It's important that we learn and that we pass it on. Whether it's just in casual conversations once a week with somebody, or whether it's teaching a Bible study or a Sunday school class, there's just lots of ways to mentor or disciple, whether you get it from someone or you give it to someone. I mean, we're all kind of at different stages. Like, maybe there's an older woman that should disciple me, but maybe I should be discipling a younger woman. And so wherever you're at in your life, there's probably somebody you can interact with on either side of the spectrum. Because we all can grow. We all need to grow. Are you obedient, faithful, patient, and willing to stand up and fight for God if called upon to do so? Joshua had to do that multiple times before he was ever made a leader. And then he had to do it many times once he was made a leader. Will you be by his side no matter what? And that's in reference to God. Will you be at his side no matter what? So the great faith, character traits, and focus of Joshua made him God's best choice to be the next leader for his people. And you realize he spent, 40 years in training. 40 years being with Moses, wandering the desert, following command after command, time with the Lord at the Tabernacle. 40 years to become the leader for Israel. I sometimes think, wouldn't you think logically maybe Aaron should have been the next leader, but he wasn't allowed to be either.
I think God looks at our heart.
Mm-hmm.
He knows the heart and not just what we think. And he sees who the person really is.
Mm-hmm. And I think Joshua proved himself over and over again. He was that faithful man that had a great character and proved himself to God. He was worthy of the job. So I just wanted to make this a basic lesson about Joshua this week, just to get to know him a little bit before we entered the promised land. So next time, after a 2-week spring break, we're all going to head to the beach. When we meet again on Monday, April 17th, we will begin our conquest of the promised land following our faithful leader Joshua.
So we're going to meet at the beach?
Sure.
Oh, come on now. We can have fish and chips.
Oh, there we go.
And our faithful leader, Kathy.
Now I have to go out and fight a war though first before I can become leader. All right, thank you.
You are fighting a war. We are.
Yeah, that's true. We are.